"They stole my clothes," the fat girl cried. "Get on my horse," the rancher said. "I'll give you a home." The dusty street falls silent. Boys laugh cruelly as she stumbles into the open, clutching herself, shame burning hotter than the noon sun. Townsfolk whisper. A church bell tolls. She has nothing left, no dignity, no hope. Then, thundering hooves, a rancher reins in his horse, throws his long coat over her shoulders, and lifts her high into the saddle. One look from him scatters the mocking crowd. For the first time, she feels safe. But safety is never simple on the frontier. Behind the ranch walls waits a life of hard work, suspicion from neighbors, and a threat that could strip away the only home she's ever known. Papers are coming from Denver, and a man with blood ties claims everything. Now, with shame chasing her past and greed closing in on her future. Will this broken girl truly find a family at last, or lose the only place she's ever belonged? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late morning sun beat down on the creek behind Miller's livery as Abigail May waded into the cool water. Coal dust from hours of sweeping stables had worked its way into every crease of her skin, leaving dark smudges that no amount of scrubbing seemed to lift. The water swirled black around her as she tried to wash away the morning's work. Cattails swayed in the gentle breeze, offering what little privacy they could. Abigail kept her worn dress close by on the bank, within arm's reach as she'd learned to do. The sound of running water almost masked the approaching footsteps. Almost, but not quite. "Look what we got here, boys." The sharp voice cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. Abigail's heart stopped. She recognized that voice. Tommy Wilson and his gang of troublemakers. Before she could reach the bank, a hand snatched up her dress. Laughter erupted as the boys dangled her only clothes just out of reach. "Ain't proper for a lady to be bathing in broad daylight," Tommy sneered, his face twisted with cruel amusement. "Reckon we ought to teach her some manners." "Give it back." Abigail's voice came out as a whisper, her throat tight with fear. She sank deeper into the water, trying to hide her shape beneath the surface. The boys just laughed harder. Tommy balled up her dress and threw it to one of his friends. "Catch, Jake! Please!" Abigail begged, but they were already running, tossing her clothes between them like some terrible game. She had no choice but to stay submerged in the creek, the water growing colder by the minute. The reeds offered thin shelter as townsfolk began passing on the road above. Some glanced down at the creek, their whispers carrying on the wind. Abigail thought she heard Mrs. Peterson's distinctive cluck of disapproval. "Shameful display," someone muttered. But no one stepped forward to help. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, her skin puckered from the water, legs trembling with cold and fear. The sun climbed higher, and still she waited, praying for some miracle that would let her escape with a shred of dignity intact. Finally, when she could bear the chill no longer, Abigail gathered what courage she had left. Wrapping her arms tight around herself, she crept from the creek, trying to stay hidden behind the reeds. Water streamed from her hair and clothes as she looked frantically for anything to cover herself. But the bank was bare except for stones and twigs. Taking a shuddering breath, she made a dash for the road, planning to cut behind the buildings to the alley where she sometimes slept. She'd barely taken 3 steps when voices rang out. "There she is! Look at the size of her! Like a drowned cow." The cruel laughter felt like physical blows. Abigail hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller as she stumbled onto the dusty street. Tears blurred her vision as she tried to shield herself with her hands. The sound of hoofbeats approached, and Abigail's terror doubled. More witnesses to her shame. She wanted to melt into the ground, to disappear completely. But the horse stopped. Through her tears, she saw worn boots hit the dirt as someone dismounted. A shadow fell over her, and suddenly warm weight settled across her shoulders. A coat, heavy with the scent of leather and hay. "Here now," a quiet voice said. Strong hands helped her wrap the coat around herself properly, treating her with careful respect. "You're all right, miss." Abigail dared to look up. A tall man stood between her and the growing crowd, his broad shoulders blocking their view. When he turned to face her, she saw kindness in his weathered face, not the mockery she'd come to expect. "Liam Keene," he said simply. "Let's get you out of here." Before she could respond, he'd lifted her onto his horse as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Abigail clutched the coat closer, hardly daring to believe this wasn't some cruel new joke. But then Liam turned to where Tommy and his friends still lounged against the livery wall, their laughter dying under his steady gaze. He didn't raise his voice or make any threatening moves. He simply looked at them, disappointment and judgment clear in his expression. "Proud of yourselves, are you?" he asked quietly. "Tormenting a young woman? Making sport of someone weaker?" He shook his head slowly. "Your mas raised you better than that. Or should have." The boys shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his eyes. Tommy opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. Liam mounted behind Abigail, gathering the reins in one hand. She could feel the solid strength of him at her back, steady as a mountain. Without another word to the silent crowd, he turned his horse and headed out of town at an easy walk. Abigail kept her face pressed against his vest, breathing in the clean scent of soap and sunshine. She couldn't stop shaking, though whether from cold or shock or relief, she wasn't sure. The coat around her shoulders felt like armor, protecting her from the stares and whispers she could still feel following them down the street. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "No need," Liam replied, his voice a gentle rumble. "Those boys needed a lesson in decent behavior. Reckon you just helped teach it to them." A weak laugh escaped her, more sob than humor. But Liam didn't comment on it, just kept his horse moving at that same steady pace, leading them away from the town and its cruel memories. The rhythmic sway of the horse gradually helped calm Abigail's racing heart. She found herself matching her breathing to the animal's steps, the panic slowly ebbing away. The sun had dried most of the water from her skin, though her hair still dripped occasionally down the back of Liam's coat. "I'm getting your coat all wet," she managed after a while, guilt creeping in to replace the fear. "It'll dry," Liam said simply. "Coat's seen worse than a little creek water in its day." His matter-of-fact tone, completely free of judgment or pity, finally allowed Abigail to relax slightly. She kept hold of the coat's edges with trembling fingers, but she was able to lift her head enough to see where they were going. The road wound through scattered trees, following the creek's meandering path. Birds called from the branches, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wild roses. It felt worlds away from the humiliation of town, though they couldn't have ridden more than a mile. Liam remained silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. There was something steadying about his presence, like a sheltering wall between Abigail and all the cruelty she'd known. She didn't know why he'd chosen to help her, a stranger, and a sorry sight at that, but she was more grateful than she had words to express. The horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as they continued down the road, leaving the sound of laughter and the weight of stares far behind. With each step, Abigail felt a little more of her dignity return, wrapped safe in the folds of a stranger's kindness. The horse's steady gait carried them further from town, hooves drumming a gentle rhythm on the dusty road. Abigail's hands still trembled where they clutched Liam's coat around her shoulders. Though grateful for the rescue, fear crept back in as they rode deeper into unfamiliar territory. She'd learned early that kindness often came with cruel conditions attached. The silence stretched between them until Liam cleared his throat softly. Got a place about 3 miles ahead. Nothing fancy, mind you, but there's a spare room and fresh water from the well. Abigail stiffened slightly. Sir, I don't want to be beholden. No obligations, Liam said, his voice steady and calm. Just offering shelter to someone who needs it. Nothing more. She wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her harsh lessons about trust. As if sensing her unease, Liam continued speaking, his tone gentle. Lost my Sarah 2 years back, he said quietly. Her and our little one. Birth went wrong, and the doctor couldn't get there in time. He paused, and Abigail felt him draw a deep breath. Reckon I know something about feeling alone in this world. Loneliness can cut as deep as any cruelty. The simple honesty in his words touched something in Abigail's heart. She found herself relaxing slightly against him as they rode. I promise you'll be safe under my roof, Liam added. Got my word on that, for whatever you reckon it's worth. They passed wagon ruts carved deep in the earth, testament to the traders and settlers who'd come before. Here and there, cattle trails branched off from the main road, winding through the scrubby grass toward distant pastures. The evening sun stretched their shadows long across the ground, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. A weathered fence line appeared ahead, marking the boundary of Liam's property. Beyond it stood a modest ranch house, its wooden walls silvered by sun and wind. A barn rose behind it, and Abigail could make out the shapes of cattle grazing in the distance. Liam drew the horse to a stop in front of the house and dismounted smoothly. He reached up to help Abigail down, his movements careful and respectful. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, but she managed to keep her feet under her. Let me show you around, Liam said, leading the way. Barn's there, got 2 milk cows and some chickens. Well's just behind the house, draws sweet water even in dry seasons. He pointed out each feature of the ranch as they walked, his pride in the place evident in his voice. The kitchen door creaked softly as they entered. Late sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating a simple but tidy space. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, while a worn wooden table and chairs occupied the center of the room. Liam lit a lamp, its warm glow chasing away the growing shadows. Just as he was showing Abigail where to find cups and plates, a soft knock sounded at the door. A woman stood in the doorway, her dark eyes kind beneath silver-streaked black hair. She carried a small bundle of dried herbs in one hand. Evening, Liam, she said, then noticed Abigail. Something flickered in her expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow soul who'd known hardship. Ruth, Liam nodded in greeting. This here's Abigail. She'll be staying a spell. He turned to Abigail. Ruth. Two Feathers is my nearest neighbor. Best healer for 20 miles around. Ruth stepped inside, moving with quiet grace. Brought you more of that wild cherry bark for your chest cough, she said to Liam. Need to keep it from settling in before winter. She set the herbs on a shelf, then turned to Abigail with a gentle smile. Welcome. There was no judgment in her face, no questions about Abigail's appearance or circumstances. Just that simple welcome, as if finding a stranger wrapped in Liam's coat was the most natural thing in the world. Thank you, Abigail managed, clutching the coat closer despite the kitchen's warmth. Ruth's eyes took in Abigail's damp hair and bare feet. I have some spare clothes that might fit, she offered. Can bring them by tomorrow if you'd like." Before Abigail could respond, her stomach growled loudly. She flushed with embarrassment, but Ruth just smiled. "Sounds like supper might be wanted first," she said. "I'll leave you to it. Good evening to you both." With a small nod, she slipped out as quietly as she'd arrived. Liam was already moving around the kitchen, stirring up the banked coals in the stove. "Got some beef stew left from yesterday," he said. "Won't take but a minute to heat up." Abigail stood awkwardly by the table, unsure what to do with herself. The coat was finally starting to feel too warm, but she was reluctant to let go of its protection. "Spare room's just down the hall there," Liam said, gesturing with the spoon he'd retrieved. "Might want to get settled while the stew heats. Left some of Sarah's old things in the chest, if you want to find something dry to wear." Gratitude and uncertainty warred in Abigail's chest. "I couldn't. Your wife's things." "She'd want them used," Liam said simply. "No sense in good cloth going to waste." The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed tucked under a window. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, its faded calico squares telling silent stories of the hands that had stitched them. A wooden chest stood against one wall, and when Abigail carefully opened it, she found neatly folded dresses and underthings that smelled faintly of lavender. She changed quickly, choosing the plainest dress she could find. It was a bit tight across her middle, but the fabric was soft against her skin. She hung Liam's coat on a peg by the door, smoothing it carefully. When she returned to the kitchen, Liam had set 2 bowls of steaming stew on the table. The rich smell made her mouth water. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. Dry bread and stolen scraps had been her fare for months now. "Sit," Liam said, pulling out a chair. "Eat while it's hot." Abigail sank into the chair, trying not to show how her hands shook as she picked up the spoon. The first bite nearly brought tears to her eyes. Tender beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth that tasted of home and care, and things she'd thought lost forever. They ate in comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising and falling in wild harmony. The lamp cast gentle shadows on the walls, and the familiar creak of the house settling wrapped around them like a blanket. When the bowls were empty, Liam rose and lit a second lamp. "I'll show you where everything is," he said. "Outhouse is out back, pumps in the kitchen here. Breakfast is usually at sunrise, but sleep as long as you need." He led her back to the spare room, setting the lamp on a small table. "Lock's on the inside of the door," he said quietly. "Use it if it helps you rest easier. I sleep across the hall if you need anything." Abigail stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of it all. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay—" "No repaying needed," Liam cut in gently. "Just rest now. Tomorrow's soon enough for anything else." He left her then, his footsteps fading down the hall. Abigail turned the lock, testing it, then slowly prepared for bed. The quilt was heavy and warm when she slipped beneath it, and the pillow smelled of sunshine and clean air. She lay there in the lamp's dying light, listening to the coyotes sing their wild songs across the prairie. The faded calico squares of the quilt blurred as her eyes grew heavy. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Abigail felt something like peace settle over her. Here, in this quiet room with its locked door and borrowed quilt, she found her first taste of what belonging might feel like. The lamp flickered out, but Abigail was already sliding into deep sleep, safe under a stranger's roof, while the night wind whispered stories to the stars. Morning crept softly through the window, painting golden squares on the worn floorboards. Abigail stirred beneath the quilt, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed. The scents of coffee and fresh biscuits drifted under her door, making her stomach rumble with anticipation. She sat up slowly, smoothing her borrowed nightgown. The events of yesterday washed over her. The humiliation at the creek, Liam's rescue, the quiet dinner in this strange kitchen. It felt like a dream, but the solid walls around her confirmed its reality. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she dressed in Sarah's old clothes. She could hear movement in the kitchen, the soft clink of cups and the thump of the stove door. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked her door and stepped into the hallway. Liam stood at the stove, his back to her as he moved a coffee pot to the warmer side. He turned at her footsteps, offering a small nod. "Morning," he said. "Hope the coffee didn't wake you too early." "No, sir," Abigail replied, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. I'm used to being up with the sun." "Just Liam," he corrected gently. "No need for sir here." He gestured to the table where 2 plates waited, loaded with golden biscuits and what looked like ham. "Eat first, then I'll show you around the barn." The biscuits were light and flaky, still warm from the oven. Abigail tried to eat slowly, to show proper manners, but hunger won out. She finished 2 biscuits before she remembered herself, cheeks flushing as she set down her fork. "There's plenty more," Liam said, pushing the plate closer. "Need a good breakfast for ranch work." After breakfast, Abigail followed Liam to the barn, her borrowed boots scuffing in the dirt. Morning light streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The sweet smell of hay mingled with the earthier scents of horses and leather. "Feed goes in here," Liam demonstrated, showing her the feed bins and hay storage. "Horses get measured portions. Too much can founder them." He walked her through the morning routine, patient with her awkward attempts to copy his movements. The horses watched them with bright eyes, nickering softly when Liam approached their stalls. He introduced each one by name, explaining their personalities as if speaking of old friends. "This is Buck," he said, patting a sturdy bay gelding. "Steady as they come. And here's Star," he added, gesturing to a dappled mare. "Bit skittish, but true-hearted." Outside, the morning air held a hint of autumn crispness. Liam showed her the well, demonstrating how to prime the pump and work the handle. "Takes some strength," he warned, "but you'll build up to it." Abigail gripped the pump handle, pushing down with all her might. The metal resisted at first, then gave way with a groan. Water gushed forth, splashing her skirts. She jumped back with a small yelp, but Liam just nodded approvingly. "You'll get the rhythm of it," he said. "Everything on a ranch has its own rhythm, once you learn to feel it." The morning passed in a blur of new tasks and instructions. Abigail's arms ached from pumping water and carrying feed, but she welcomed the honest tiredness. It felt clean somehow, different from the exhaustion of hiding and scrounging. Around midday, Ruth appeared at the edge of the yard, a bundle of cloth tucked under one arm. She moved with quiet grace, her long dark hair gleaming in the sun. "Good morning," she called. "Thought I'd show you about the herbs, if you've time." Liam nodded his permission, and Abigail followed Ruth to a small herb garden near the kitchen door. Ruth knelt in the dirt, naming each plant as she touched it. "This is sage," she said. "Good for clearing the mind. And here's chamomile for sleep, mint for settling the stomach." She showed Abigail how to grind dried herbs with a stone mortar and pestle, explaining which combinations made the best teas. "Grinding releases the medicine," she explained, "but you must do it with respect, with good thoughts in your heart." After Ruth left, Liam appeared in his Sunday coat. "Need to ride into town," he said. "Get you some proper clothes of your own." Abigail's heart clenched at the thought of returning to town, but she nodded bravely. The ride was quiet, broken only by the steady clip of hooves and the creak of leather. As they approached the general store, Abigail fought the urge to shrink behind Liam's broad shoulders. The store bell jingled as they entered. Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, looked up from her ledger. Her eyes widened slightly at Abigail's size, then darted to Liam with poorly concealed curiosity. "Need some dresses?" Liam said firmly, before Mrs. Peterson could speak. "Work clothes and something for Sunday. Boots, too." Mrs. Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line, but she moved to the dress rack. "We might have something that could be adjusted," she said, eyeing Abigail's figure with barely disguised pity. "Proper dresses," Liam insisted, his voice carrying a note of steel. "Whatever needs ordering, we'll order. And good boots, mind, not seconds." The measuring and fitting seemed to take hours. Mrs. Peterson's hands were efficient but cold as she wrapped her tape measure around Abigail's waist and shoulders. Yet with each number recorded, each fabric selected, Abigail felt something shift inside her. These would be her clothes, chosen with care, made to fit her body as it was. The ride home was quieter still. As the sun began its westward slide, Abigail gathered her courage. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. "For the clothes and everything." Liam just nodded, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. That evening, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Abigail rose to wash the dishes. The familiar task soothed her, giving her hands something useful to do. She had just finished drying the last plate when she heard Liam's voice from the kitchen. She stepped quietly to the doorway, then froze. Liam sat at the table, his head bowed over clasped hands. His voice was low but clear in the evening stillness. "Lord," he prayed, "guide my steps in this. Help me offer shelter without shame, protection without pride. Show me how to be father to the fatherless, as you commanded. And Lord, thank you for sending her. This house has been too quiet too long." Abigail stood motionless, tears pricking at her eyes. As Liam's amen faded into the gathering dark, she added her own soft echo from the doorway. "Amen." Liam's head lifted slowly, but he didn't turn. After a moment, he reached out and pulled out the chair beside him. Abigail crossed the kitchen on trembling legs and sat, her hands folded in her lap. Together they watched the last light fade from the windows, while crickets began their evening song. A week passed like water flowing in the creek, steady and sure. Each morning brought new lessons for Abigail, from feeding chickens to churning butter. But it was the quiet evening hours that she treasured most, when Liam taught her to mend shirts by lamplight. "Thread needs to be strong," he explained, showing her how to double the cotton strand. "Ranching's hard on clothes. Weak stitches won't hold." Abigail watched his weathered hands demonstrate the neat, even stitches. Her own attempts were clumsy at first, but she persisted until her fingers found their rhythm. The repetitive motion soothed her, like a simple prayer. In the kitchen, she learned to cook alongside him. Liam wasn't much for fancy dishes, but he knew his way around a Dutch oven. He showed her how to judge the heat of coals, how to layer biscuits so they'd rise proper, how to season beans with just the right amount of salt pork. "My Sarah taught me," he said one evening, stirring a pot of stew. "Said no man should depend entirely on a woman's cooking. Might find himself alone someday." His voice caught slightly on the words, but he kept stirring. The autumn sun was setting, painting the kitchen windows gold, when hoofbeats approached the ranch house. Abigail looked up from kneading bread dough, flour dusting her arms. Liam wiped his hands and went to the door. "Evening, Mr. Keene," came a woman's voice, cultured and careful. "We were passing by and thought we'd pay our respects." Mrs. Harper stood on the porch, her two daughters flanking her like matched bookends. All three wore riding habits, though there wasn't a hair out of place on any of them. Their eyes found Abigail in the kitchen, curiosity barely masked by politeness. "Come in," Liam said, stepping back. "We were just fixing supper." "Oh, how domestic," Mrs. Harper said, gliding into the kitchen. Her daughters, Sarah Beth and Mary Louise, followed with identical delicate steps. "And this must be the young lady we've heard about." Abigail wiped her hands on her apron, conscious of every grain of flour, every strand of hair escaping her braid. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Abigail May." "How nice," Mrs. Harper smiled, but her eyes were measuring. "Mr. Keene, you're so generous to take in a—" She paused, selecting her words like dried beans. "A young person in need." "Abigail's been a blessing," Liam said firmly. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some." The Harper women perched on kitchen chairs like birds on a fence, sipping coffee and making polite conversation. They asked carefully worded questions about Abigail's background, her duties at the ranch, how she was settling in. Each answer seemed to confirm something they'd already decided. "Well, we should be going," Mrs. Harper finally announced, setting down her cup. "It's getting dark, and the trail can be treacherous." Liam walked them to their horses, proper as always. Abigail stayed in the kitchen, pretending to focus on her bread dough, but the window was open to catch the evening breeze, and voices carried clear as creek water. "The fat orphan," Mary Louise whispered, not quite soft enough. "Can you imagine her trying to replace Mother Sarah?" "Hush," Mrs. Harper scolded, but her tone held more amusement than rebuke. "Though I must say Mr. Keene's charity might have found a more suitable object." "Did you see how she'd scattered flour everywhere?" Sarah Beth added. "Mother Sarah kept such a tidy kitchen." Abigail's hands stilled in the dough. Tears burned behind her eyes, hot as the cook stove. She'd known, of course she'd known, that she could never measure up to Liam's lost wife. But hearing it spoken so plainly cut deeper than she'd expected. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Abigail heard Liam's boots on the porch steps, then in the kitchen. She kept her head down, hoping he hadn't heard, hoping he couldn't see how their words had wounded her. But Liam had always seen more than most. He pulled out a chair and sat, waiting until she looked up. "Their words don't change anything," he said quietly. "You're here because I want you here, because this house needs life in it again, and you bring that with your learning and trying and caring about things." Abigail wiped her eyes with her sleeve, leaving a streak of flour across her cheek. "I know I can't replace her. You're Sarah." "No," Liam agreed, his voice gentle. "You can't, no one could, but that's not what I'm asking of you." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "Sit down. Bread can wait a spell." Abigail sat, her hands twisting in her flour-dusted apron. The kitchen had grown dim, the sunset fading to purple through the windows. Liam lit the lamp, its warm glow creating a small circle of comfort around them. "Sarah was everything to me," he began slowly. "We grew up together, married young. She had such plans for this place, flowers in the yard, curtains at the windows, children running everywhere." His voice roughened. "When she got pregnant, we thought God had finally blessed us. But the baby came too early. There were complications. By morning, I'd lost them both." The lamp flame wavered as he spoke, casting shifting shadows on the walls. "For 2 years after, I just existed. Did what needed doing, spoke when spoken to. But inside, I was hollow as a dead tree. Wouldn't let anyone close. Figured that was safer." Abigail sat very still, barely breathing. Liam had never spoken so much at once, never shared the depth of his loss so plainly. "Then I saw you that day," he continued, trying to hide your hurt behind that livery. Saw how folks just walked by, pretending not to notice. And something in me that had been sleeping woke up. Realized maybe God wasn't finished with me yet. Maybe there was still some good I could do in this world. Tears slid down Abigail's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "My pa," she whispered, the words coming slow and painful. "He used to trade my work for whiskey, send me to sweep stables or scrub floors, take the payment straight to the saloon. Some days he'd forget to come back for me. Then one day, he just didn't come back at all." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I kept working where I could, sleeping in barns or on back porches if folks would let me. Some were kind, gave me scraps from their kitchens. Others..." She shuddered. "Others weren't so kind." "You survived," Liam said softly. "That takes courage." "Wasn't courage," Abigail shook her head. "Just didn't know what else to do. Keep going or lay down and die, and I was too scared to die." "That's what courage is, sometimes," Liam replied. "Just putting one foot in front of the other when laying down would be easier." They sat in companionable silence as full dark settled outside. Crickets chirped their evening songs, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The lamp burned lower, but neither moved to trim it. "Those women," Abigail finally said. "They weren't wrong about one thing. I'm not much to look at. Not the kind of daughter anyone would choose." "Good thing I ain't much to look at either," Liam said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "We match that way." His expression grew serious again. "But looks ain't what matters here. What matters is the heart, and yours is true as any I've known." Abigail ducked her head, overwhelmed by his quiet acceptance. After a moment she stood and went to the forgotten bread dough. Her hands remembered their work, kneading and shaping with newfound certainty. Liam rose too, adding wood to the stove and checking the stew. They worked together in the lamplight, two wounded souls finding healing in simple tasks shared. The bread rose golden and fragrant, the stew bubbled with promise, and if there were still tears sometimes, they were gentler now, clean like rain instead of bitter like grief. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Abigail stepped onto the front porch, broom in hand. The wooden planks creaked beneath her feet as she began her morning sweep, working in steady strokes to clear away the dust that seemed to settle everywhere in ranch country. This had become her quiet time, these early moments before the day truly began. The routine of ranch life had settled into her bones over the past weeks. Each day brought its own rhythm, familiar tasks that needed doing, animals that needed tending. She'd learned to wake before sunrise, just as Liam did, ready to face whatever work awaited. The morning air carried a hint of autumn crispness as she moved to the barn. Inside, the cow waited patiently in her stall, udder full and heavy. Abigail remembered her first awkward attempts at milking, how her fingers had cramped and the cow had shifted restlessly. But Ruth had shown her the proper way. Gentle, steady pressure, a soothing voice, and most importantly, patience. "There now, Bessie," Abigail murmured, settling onto the milking stool. The cow's warmth pressed against her shoulder as rich streams of milk hit the bottom of the tin pail with a musical ping. These quiet moments with Bessie had become something of a comfort. The animal's steady breathing, the sweet smell of hay, the satisfaction of a task well done. When she finished, she carried the heavy pail carefully to the house, arms stronger now than they'd been weeks ago. The work had changed her, slowly but surely. Her hands had grown calloused, her steps more certain. Even her dresses fit differently, hanging better on her sturdier frame. The chicken coop was her next stop. "Come on, ladies," she called, scattering feed across the yard. The hens bustled around her feet, pecking and scratching. She'd learned their personalities, the bossy red hen, the shy speckled one that always hung back. Collecting eggs had become a treasure hunt she actually enjoyed. A soft snuffle behind her made her turn. One of the young calves had wandered over, drawn by curiosity and the promise of attention. Its wet nose investigated her skirt, making her laugh as it left a damp spot on the fabric. "You're a friendly one, aren't you?" she said, reaching out to scratch behind its ears. The calf leaned into her touch, nearly knocking her off balance. Her laughter rang out again, echoing across the yard. From the porch, Liam watched with quiet satisfaction. "Reckon it's about time to get ready for church," he called. Abigail's smile dimmed slightly, but she nodded. Sunday services meant facing the town, enduring the sideways glances and whispered comments. But Liam insisted it was important to attend, and she wouldn't let him down. They rode in together, Abigail wearing her best dress, a deep blue cotton that Ruth had helped her alter to fit properly. The church stood white against the morning sky, its small steeple reaching toward heaven. People gathered outside, dressed in their Sunday finest, conversations falling to whispers as Liam helped Abigail down from the wagon. Pastor Whitfield stood at the door, greeting his flock. His weathered face creased in a genuine smile when he saw them. "Brother Liam, Sister Abigail, welcome. It's good to see you both." "Thank you, Pastor," Abigail replied softly, grateful for his kindness. But as they made their way to a pew, she could hear the murmurs. Bold as brass, bringing her here. Poor Liam Keene, what can he be thinking? Size of her, taking up half the bench. Abigail fixed her eyes straight ahead, trying to focus on the worn hymnal in her hands. Liam's shoulder pressed against hers, solid and reassuring. Pastor Whitfield took his place at the pulpit, and the service began. When it came time for the first hymn, he announced, "Let us all join in singing Amazing Grace." The organ wheezed to life, and the congregation rose. Abigail knew this hymn by heart. She'd sung it to herself on countless lonely nights, finding comfort in its familiar verses. Without thinking, she opened her mouth and let her voice rise. The sound that emerged surprised even her. Clear and strong, her voice lifted above the general chorus, pure as spring water. The notes soared to the rafters, carrying all the emotion she'd kept buried, pain and hope, loneliness and gratitude. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. Children turned in their seats to stare. The usual gossips faltered in their singing, faces showing frank astonishment. Even Pastor Whitfield paused for a moment, before a smile of genuine pleasure spread across his face. Abigail sang on, losing herself in the music. Her voice filled the small church, transforming the simple hymn into something approaching glory. When the final note faded, a hushed silence fell. Then Pastor Whitfield spoke into that silence. Truly, the Lord gifts his children in unexpected ways. Let us continue with Rock of Ages. The next hymn began, and this time other voices joined Abigail's more confidently. She felt something shift in the air around her, like a change in the wind. After the service, as people filed out into the sunshine, Widow Harrison approached. She was a stern-faced woman who had never so much as nodded in Abigail's direction before. "Miss May," she said, extending her hand. "I wanted to tell you, your voice brought back memories of my Sarah's singing. She led the choir here for 20 years before the fever took her. We've missed having real music in our services." Abigail took the offered hand, feeling its warm strength. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. That's very kind of you to say." Others stopped to speak as well, offering compliments, asking if she'd consider joining the choir. Even some of the previous whisperers nodded in her direction, their faces showing a newfound respect. The ride home was different from any previous Sunday. Abigail sat straight in the wagon, head held high, while Liam handled the reins. The afternoon sun warm on her face, she found herself humming softly. Not from nervousness this time, but from a quiet joy that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep inside. "You surprised them today," Liam commented, his voice carrying a note of pride. "I surprised myself," Abigail admitted. "I've always sung, but never like that. Never where anyone could hear." "Sometimes," Liam said thoughtfully, "the Lord gives us gifts we don't even know we have, just waiting for the right moment to shine forth." They rode on in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels creating their own rhythm against the packed earth. Abigail watched the familiar landscape roll past, the scattered oak trees, the grazing cattle, the distant mountains painted in shades of blue. For the first time, she felt truly part of it all, not just a temporary presence waiting to be sent away. The ranch came into view, their home. The thought no longer seemed presumptuous or frightening. She had earned her place here, not just through work, but through the gradual opening of her heart to possibility. Like her voice in church, something within her had finally found the courage to rise, to be heard, to claim its space in the world. As they pulled up to the house, the young calf from that morning ambled over to greet them, followed by its mother. Abigail reached out to scratch its ears, her laughter mixing with the evening bird song. The sound carried across the yard, free and unrestrained, much like her hymn singing had filled the church, the music of a soul no longer hiding from its own light. The late September morning dawned clear and crisp, dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Liam stood on his porch, coffee cup warming his hands, as he watched the sun climb over the eastern hills. His daily ritual of greeting the dawn had become sweeter since Abigail joined his household, her presence filling empty spaces he had thought would stay hollow forever. The clip-clop of hooves drew his attention. Young Tommy from the telegraph office rode up, his pony kicking up dust along the trail. The boy clutched a thick envelope in his hand. "Mornin', Mr. Keene," Tommy called out, dismounting with a jump. "Got something from Denver for you. Looks important like." Liam set his coffee down and descended the porch steps. The envelope was indeed substantial, bearing an elaborate return address from a Denver law office. His stomach tightened as he recognized the precise handwriting. Silas Avery, his late wife's brother. "Much obliged, Tommy," Liam said, pressing a nickel into the boy's palm. He waited until the messenger had ridden away before breaking the seal. The letter inside was dated 3 weeks prior, written on expensive paper that crackled as he unfolded it. As he read, his jaw clenched tight enough to ache. "Mr. Keene," the letter began formally, "this correspondence serves to inform you that I, Silas Avery, hereby claim rightful ownership of the property known as the Keene Ranch, through inheritance law, as brother and closest living relative to the deceased Sarah Avery Keene." The words blurred before his eyes. Silas went on to detail his legal standing, citing regulations and precedents that made Liam's head swim. The final paragraph stated that Silas would arrive in 1 month's time with the necessary documentation to transfer ownership. The screen door creaked behind him. "Liam?" Abigail's voice was soft with concern. "Is everything all right?" He quickly folded the letter, tucking it into his vest pocket. "Just some business matters," he said, forcing a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Abigail had grown observant during her weeks on the ranch. She noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way his shoulders had drawn up with tension. She didn't press him, though. Instead, she picked up the axe leaning against the woodpile. "I can help stack the firewood today," she offered. "Winter's coming, and we'll need plenty." Liam started to object, It was heavy work, but stopped himself. These past weeks had shown him Abigail's quiet strength, her determination to earn her place. Her arms had grown stronger, her movements more confident. "All right," he agreed. "But mind your back and take breaks when you need to." They worked together through the morning, Liam splitting logs while Abigail stacked them in neat rows against the barn wall. The rhythm of their labor helped ease some of the knots in his shoulders, though the letter weighed heavy in his pocket. Around midday, Ruth Two Feathers appeared on the trail, her woven basket full of dried herbs and roots. She took one look at Liam's face and paused. "Trouble rides the wind today," she said simply, her dark eyes knowing. Liam nodded slightly. Ruth had been a good neighbor these past years, keeping to herself, but always willing to help when needed. She had been particularly kind to Abigail, sharing knowledge of healing plants and frontier skills. "Come, girl," Ruth called to Abigail. "Let me show you how to mend this harness properly. Usefulness builds belonging, and every skill learned is a treasure earned." Abigail set down her last log and went to join Ruth in the barn. Through the open door, Liam could hear Ruth's patient instructions mixing with the soft creak of leather as they worked. The older woman's words about usefulness and belonging struck him deeply, considering the threat that now loomed over their small family. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its westward slide, Liam made a decision. He led his gentle bay mare, Sugar, from the corral to where Abigail was hanging washing on the line. "Time you learned to ride proper," he said. "Every ranch person needs to know their way around a horse." Abigail's eyes widened. "Are you sure? I mean, I'm rather heavy, and I wouldn't want to hurt her." "Sugar's strong and steady," Liam assured her. "She's carried heavier loads than you plenty of times. Come on." He showed her how to check the cinch, how to gather the reins properly, how to mount using the fence as a step. Sugar stood patient and calm, turning her head to watch with liquid brown eyes as Abigail settled nervously in the saddle. "Sit deep," Liam instructed. "Let your weight sink down through your seat, that's it. Now just give her a gentle squeeze with your legs." Sugar moved forward at a sedate walk. Abigail clutched the saddle horn at first, but as they circled the corral, her grip gradually relaxed. Liam watched her posture change as she found her balance, beginning to move with the horse's rhythm instead of fighting it. "Ready to try a trot?" he asked after several rounds. Abigail nodded, a spark of excitement replacing her earlier fear. He talked her through the posting motion, and soon she was rising and falling in time with Sugar's two-beat gait, her face flushed with accomplishment. "Now?" she asked eagerly when they paused for a rest. Could we try going faster?" Liam couldn't help smiling at her enthusiasm. "All right, but keep your hands soft on the reins, and if you feel scared, just say, 'Whoa,' and she'll stop." He opened the corral gate, leading them out to the open pasture where the ground was level and clear. "Give her another squeeze, a little stronger this time, and lean forward just a bit." Sugar broke into a smooth canter. Abigail let out a startled gasp that quickly turned into delighted laughter. The sound rang across the pasture, pure and joyful, rising up to the blue September sky. Her hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner as they galloped across the grass. Ruth, who had come out to watch, smiled at the sight. "The girl blooms like a flower after rain," she observed. "Each day brings new strength." Liam nodded, but the letter in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. How could he tell Abigail that this home they were building, this place where she had finally begun to trust and grow, might be taken away? Silas Avery was a man who wielded the law like a weapon, who had never approved of his sister marrying a simple rancher. When Abigail finally returned to the fence, her cheeks were glowing and her eyes sparkled with triumph. "Did you see?" she called out. "Did you see how fast we went?" "You did fine," Liam assured her, helping her dismount. "Real fine." "Next time we'll work on steering at speed," Ruth added, including herself naturally in future plans. "A good rider needs to be one with her horse in all gaits." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the barn, with Abigail eager to learn more about caring for Sugar. She helped brush the mare down, clean her hooves, and measure out her evening feed. Ruth showed her how to check for signs of soreness or strain, teaching her the proper way to run her hands down the horse's legs. "Every creature that gives us service deserves our careful attention," Ruth explained. "This is not just work. It is respect. It is relationship." Liam watched them work together, his heart heavy with the knowledge he was keeping from them. But for now, he chose to focus on Abigail's newfound confidence, the way she moved about the barn with growing assurance, the proud set of her shoulders as she mastered each new task. The sun was setting when Ruth finally gathered her things to leave. She paused at the barn door, looking back at Liam with those knowing eyes. "Whatever trouble comes," she said quietly, "remember that strength grows best in shared soil. The alone tree falls in storm winds, but the grove stands together." Liam nodded, understanding her meaning. He would have to tell them soon about Silas's letter, about the threat to their home. But watching Abigail lead Sugar to her stall, humming softly as she worked, he decided it could wait one more day. Let her have this moment of pure joy, this triumph of trust and learning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges soon enough. The autumn air carried a crisp bite as Liam and Abigail set out early to mend the pasture fence. Wooden posts and rolls of wire filled the back of the wagon, tools rattling with each bump. Abigail sat straight beside Liam, no longer shrinking into herself as she had those first weeks. "Reckon we can get this section done before sundown," Liam said, steering the horses toward the far meadow. "Ground's still soft enough to set posts." Abigail nodded, watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. "I can hold the posts steady while you drive them in." The work was harder than she'd expected. Each post had to be positioned just right, perfectly straight and deep enough to withstand winter storms. Sweat dampened her collar despite the cool morning as she braced the heavy timber while Liam swung the maul. Around midday, they paused to rest in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Abigail passed Liam the water jug and unwrapped bread and cheese she'd packed that morning. The simple meal tasted like heaven after hours of labor. "You're getting stronger," Liam observed, watching her drive in a smaller support stake with sure strikes. "Hands are toughening up too." "They need to be tough," she replied, flexing fingers that were no longer soft and idle. "There's satisfaction in working hard, in seeing what you've built." They spent the afternoon stretching wire between posts, Liam showing her how to tension it properly so it wouldn't sag. The sharp metal bit at their palms despite thick gloves. As the sun began to sink, Abigail surveyed their work with pride. The new fence line ran straight and true across the grassland. That evening, she sat by lamplight mending one of Liam's shirts, her needle flying in and out of the worn fabric. The peaceful rhythm was broken by a sudden sharp pain. "Ouch!" A bright bead of blood welled from her pricked finger. Before she could react, Liam was beside her, gently taking her hand in his weathered ones. "Let me see that," he said, examining the small wound. With careful movements, he cleaned it with a drop of whiskey and wrapped it in a small strip of clean cloth. His touch was tender, almost fatherly. "There now," he said, tying off the bandage. "Can't have you getting an infection. You're family already, and family looks after each other." Abigail's throat tightened at his words. Family. How long she'd ached to hear that word applied to her. She ducked her head to hide sudden tears, but Liam's squeeze of her shoulder told her he understood. The next morning, Abigail rose before dawn. She gathered fresh eggs from the henhouse, placing them carefully in a basket lined with clean straw. Today, she would venture into town alone, her first solo trip since that terrible day by the creek. "You sure about this?" Liam asked as she prepared to leave, concern evident in his voice. "I am," she said firmly. "We need supplies, and the eggs will fetch a good price. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I can't hide forever." The road to town seemed shorter now that she rode confidently on Sugar's back. The mare's steady gait carried her past familiar landmarks: the lightning-struck oak, the sheep meadow, the old stone wall. As they approached the outskirts of town, Abigail sat straighter in the saddle. She noticed the stairs as she rode down the main street, but they felt different now. The group of boys who had once tormented her lounged outside the mercantile, but their mockery died on their lips as she passed. Something in her bearing, her quiet dignity, made them shift uncomfortably and look away. At the general store, she conducted her business with calm efficiency, recording the egg sale in the ledger with careful penmanship. As she wrote, a shadow fell across the page. "What beautiful handwriting you have, my dear." Abigail looked up to meet the kind eyes of Miss Sarah Bennett, the town's schoolmarm. The woman smiled warmly. "Such elegant letters. Did you attend school?" "No, ma'am," Abigail replied. "I taught myself from discarded primers and shop signs." "Remarkable," Miss Bennett said. "You have quite a gift for letters. Perhaps you'd like to borrow some books. I have quite a library at the schoolhouse." Abigail felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I would like that very much, thank you." With her trading done and eggs sold, Abigail allowed herself one small luxury: a length of blue ribbon for her hair. The shopkeeper's wife measured it out without the pitying looks she'd once given, treating her like any other customer. The ride home felt triumphant, though Abigail carried her victory quietly. The ribbon was a soft weight in her pocket, a symbol of how far she'd come from that terrified girl hiding in the creek. She heard the coughing before she reached the barn, harsh, racking sounds that made her hurry Sugar into a trot. She found Liam bent double near the corral, dust from the day's work coating his clothes. "Inside, right now," she ordered, taking his arm. He was too winded to protest as she led him to the house. Working quickly, Abigail stoked the stove and set water to boil. From Ruth's carefully labeled packets, she measured out the herbs for the chest tea: horehound, mullein, and wild cherry bark. The familiar motions calmed her as she prepared the medicine exactly as Ruth had taught her. "Drink this," she said, pressing the steaming cup into Liam's hands. "All of it." He complied, and gradually his breathing eased. Color returned to his face as the healing herbs did their work. When the worst had passed, they moved to the front porch where the evening air was cool and sweet. Crickets began their nightly chorus as purple shadows lengthened across the yard. Neither spoke for a long while, simply sharing the peaceful moment. Finally, Liam cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the tea and for caring." Abigail smoothed her skirts, touching the pocket where the blue ribbon lay. "That's what family does," she replied. "We look after each other." They sat together as stars began to prick through the darkening sky, listening to the crickets sing. The ranch around them felt solid, real, a home built not just of timber and nails but of shared work, shared meals, shared care. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The evening air carried the scent of sage and coming frost. Abigail breathed it in deeply, savoring this moment of quiet gratitude. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived wrapped in Liam's coat. She had found her strength, her place, her family. The knowledge settled in her heart like a warm ember, glowing steady and true. The autumn sun hung low on the horizon, painting the western sky in deep shades of orange and purple when the distant rumble of wheels caught Abigail's attention. She stood at the kitchen window, wiping her hands on her apron after finishing the evening's bread-making. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the steady clip-clop of hooves and the creak of leather harness. Liam stepped onto the porch, his shadow stretching long across the weathered boards. Abigail watched as a sleek black stagecoach emerged from the tree line, dust billowing behind its wheels. The vehicle looked startlingly out of place against the humble backdrop of the ranch, its polished wood and brass fittings gleaming in the fading light. The coach drew to a halt in front of the house. The driver, wearing a smart uniform, jumped down to open the door with practiced efficiency. A tall man in an expensive Eastern coat stepped out, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve with gloved hands. His bearing screamed wealth and privilege, from his polished boots to his precisely trimmed mustache. Behind him, a second man emerged, shorter, wearing a badge that caught the dying sunlight. The deputy marshal's presence made Abigail's stomach clench with anxiety. She shrank back from the window, heart pounding, but couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding outside. "Brother-in-law," the well-dressed man called out, his cultured voice carrying a note of false warmth. "How disappointing to find you still occupying my sister's property." Liam remained motionless on the porch, his stance relaxed but watchful. "Silas," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Long way from Denver." "Indeed." Silas Avery mounted the porch steps, each footfall deliberate. "Though I'd have come sooner had I known you'd turned my dear sister's home into a charity house." The deputy marshal followed, clutching a leather portfolio of documents. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding Liam's direct gaze. Abigail crept closer to the door, pressing herself against the wall beside it. Through the gap, she could see the three men clearly now. Silas stood with the confidence of someone used to having his way, while the deputy shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I have here," Silas continued, gesturing to the marshal's documents, "clear proof of my legal right to this property. As Catherine's only living blood relative, inheritance law is quite specific." "The ranch was deeded to both of us," Liam said quietly. "Catherine and me together." "Ah, but there are complications." Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The original deed appears to have been improperly filed. A clerical error, you understand. Most unfortunate." The deputy cleared his throat. "Mr. Keene, sir, I have to serve these papers. It's my duty to— show me." Liam's voice remained steady as he held out his hand. The deputy passed over the documents, which Liam began to read carefully in the failing light. Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders, though his face remained impassive. "These will need proper review," Liam said finally. "By a judge, not just a Denver lawyer's opinion." Silas's smile tightened. "Of course. I'm nothing if not fair. You shall have your review, though I suggest you begin making arrangements. I intend to take possession within the month." "You'll stay for supper?" Liam asked, his tone making it more statement than question. "How gracious." Silas removed his gloves with precise movements. "I would indeed like to see how my sister's home has been maintained." Abigail scrambled away from the door, hurrying to set extra places at the table. Her hands trembled as she laid out the plates and cups, careful not to let them clatter. The bread she'd just baked sat cooling on the sideboard, its homey smell now seeming to mock her rising panic. The men entered, bringing with them a wave of tension that filled the small kitchen. Liam moved to the stove, where the evening's stew simmered. "Abigail," he called softly, "would you help me serve?" She emerged from the shadows, feeling Silas's sharp gaze assess her. His lip curled slightly as he took in her plain dress and solid figure. "So this is the stray I've heard about," he said, settling into a chair as if he already owned it. "The town gossips have been most entertaining in their letters." Liam's hand tightened on the ladle he held. "Abigail is part of this household," he said firmly. "You'll treat her with respect under my roof." "Your roof?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "How much longer will it be yours, I wonder? And then what becomes of your charity case?" Abigail's cheeks burned as she served the stew, trying to keep her hands steady. The deputy accepted his bowl with a mumbled thanks, clearly wishing he were elsewhere. "Tell me, girl," Silas continued, his voice honey-sweet with malice, "what skills do you possess that make you worth feeding? Besides being an additional mouth to feed?" "That's enough." Liam's hand slammed down on the table, making the dishes jump. His voice was quiet, but carried the kind of authority that commanded attention. "You will never speak to her that way again. Not in this house. Not ever." Silence fell, broken only by the tick of the clock on the mantel. Silas's face flushed dark with anger, but he said nothing more. They ate without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of spoons and the occasional clink of cups against saucers. Abigail forced herself to eat, though each bite tasted like ash. She could feel Silas watching her, calculating, dismissive. When the meal finally ended, she cleared the dishes with trembling hands while Liam walked his unwanted guests out to their waiting coach. Later, after Silas and the deputy had departed in a cloud of dust and ill will, Abigail lay in her bed, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. The familiar creaks of the house settling seemed ominous now. Somewhere in the distance, wolves began to howl, a sound that had once frightened her but had become almost comforting in recent weeks. Tonight, though, their cries seemed to echo her own fears. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, trying to hold on to the feeling of security it had once given her. But peace eluded her as her mind raced with worried thoughts. What would become of her if Silas took the ranch? Where would she go? The memory of those days sleeping in hay lofts and surviving on scraps rose up like a specter, threatening to become her future once again. More wolves joined the chorus outside, their voices rising and falling in the darkness. Abigail pressed her face into the pillow, no longer the confident young woman who had ridden alone into town that morning. Now she felt like that frightened girl by the creek again, watching her whole world threaten to unravel. Through the thin walls, she could hear Liam moving about in the kitchen, his boots scraping against the floorboards. He was probably studying those papers again, looking for some way to fight back against Silas's legal attack. The sound of his presence offered small comfort, but she knew even Liam's strength might not be enough to save their home. The wolves fell silent eventually, but Abigail remained awake, listening to the wind whisper through the grass outside her window. The home she had found, the family she had begun to trust in, it all felt as fragile as morning frost, ready to melt away at the first harsh touch of sun. She turned onto her side, watching shadows from the moon play across the familiar walls of her room. Memories of the past weeks flickered through her mind, learning to milk the cow, the triumph of her first perfect loaf of bread, Liam's gentle patience as he taught her to ride. The thought that all of this might be torn away made her chest ache with a pain deeper than any physical hunger she had known. Hours crept by, marked only by the steady tick of the clock downstairs and the occasional distant cry of a night bird. Sleep remained elusive as Abigail lay there, fighting back tears and trying to find courage in the darkness. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she knew nothing would ever be the same after this night. Morning came too soon, pale light creeping across weathered floorboards. Abigail rose early, her hands steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. She pulled out her best calico dress, the blue one with tiny white flowers that Liam had bought her at the general store. The fabric felt soft and familiar under her fingers as she carefully smoothed out the wrinkles. In the kitchen, she found Liam already dressed and studying the papers again by lamplight. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he had barely slept. He looked up when she entered, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't have to come to town," he said softly. "Might be easier to stay here." Abigail shook her head as she moved to stoke the stove. "I aim to stand beside you, Mr. Keene, whatever comes." His expression softened at her words. "Much obliged, Abigail. Reckon I could use the support today." They shared a quick breakfast of cold biscuits and coffee. Outside, the morning air held an autumn chill as Liam saddled the horses. Abigail's mare nickered softly when she approached, and she took comfort in the familiar smell of leather and horse as she mounted up. They met Silas on the road into town. He sat straight-backed on a borrowed livery horse, looking out of place in his fine Eastern clothes. His smile when he saw them carried all the warmth of a rattlesnake's warning. "Good morning," he called with false cheer. "I trust you've had time to consider your position?" Liam didn't answer, just urged his horse forward. Abigail followed, keeping her eyes fixed ahead as they rode three abreast down the dusty street. The town was already stirring, storekeepers sweeping porches, women heading to market with baskets, children scampering to school. The courthouse stood at the end of Main Street, its weather-beaten clapboards a far cry from the grand buildings Silas probably knew in Denver. Deputy Marshal Carter waited on the steps, his expression carefully neutral as they dismounted and tied their horses. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. Shelves lined with leather-bound records stretched from floor to ceiling. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles. "These warrant papers appear to be in order," Deputy Carter said, spreading the documents on the desk. "Mr. Avery's lawyer in Denver has filed a formal claim based on blood inheritance rights." Liam's jaw tightened. "The ranch was deeded jointly to Catherine and me when we married. We built it together." The clerk shuffled through more papers, adjusting his glasses. "There seems to be an irregularity with the original filing, Mr. Keene. The marriage deed was recorded, but the property transfer—" He paused, frowning. "Well, there's no clear record of it being properly registered." "Convenient," Liam said quietly. Silas spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. "The law is quite clear on these matters. As Catherine's only surviving blood relative, in the absence of a valid deed, her portion of the property reverts to me." Abigail felt the room spin slightly. She gripped the back of a wooden chair, trying to steady herself. The deputy glanced at her with something like pity in his eyes. "Unless you can produce the original deed showing proper transfer," he said to Liam, "I'm afraid the warrant stands. You'll need to vacate the property within 30 days. 30 days? Abigail couldn't stop the words from bursting out. "But harvest is coming, and winter after that. Where are we supposed to—" Silas cut her off with a sharp look. "We? My dear girl, any arrangements between you and Mr. Keene are hardly my concern, though I'm sure the town has suitable employment for someone of your capabilities. The livery always needs sweeping, as I recall." Liam's hand found Abigail's, squeezing gently. The warmth of his calloused palm against hers helped push back the wave of panic threatening to overwhelm her. She lifted her chin, refusing to let Silas see her fear. We'll need to review all the records, Liam said firmly. Every deed and filing from the past 10 years. The research clerk nodded. Of course, though it will take time to locate everything. Time you don't have much of, Silas reminded them with a smirk. 30 days passes quickly out here on the frontier. They spent the next 2 hours going through dusty record books, but found nothing to counter Silas's claim. The morning grew warm, sunlight slanting through grimy windows as they searched. Finally, Liam straightened up from the latest ledger, his face drawn with exhaustion. Enough for today, he said quietly. We'll come back tomorrow. Outside, the street had filled with the usual morning bustle. A group of churchwomen stood gossiping near the general store, their conversation falling silent as Abigail and Liam emerged from the courthouse. Their whispers resumed almost immediately, carrying clearly in the still air. Taking in that girl, and now this. Surely he must have known. What will become of them both? Abigail felt her cheeks burn, but kept walking with her head high. As they passed the hardware store, old Mr. Peterson stepped out onto his porch. The elderly man had always been kind to her, slipping her extra pieces of penny candy when she came to trade eggs. He reached out and patted her shoulder as they passed. You got courage, girl, he muttered. Don't let him make you forget that. The ride home seemed longer than usual. Silas had stayed in town, probably to send more telegrams to his lawyer in Denver. The afternoon sun beat down as they followed the familiar trail, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Neither spoke much as they did the evening chores. Abigail fed the chickens and gathered eggs with mechanical movements, her mind elsewhere. Liam checked the cattle and mended a section of fence, though they both knew it might not matter soon. Supper was a quiet affair. The food, beans and cornbread that Abigail had made that morning, seemed to stick in their throats. Even the familiar kitchen felt different now, as if the shadow of Silas's claim had already begun to dim its warmth. After the dishes were done, Abigail lingered in the doorway of her room. The quilt on her bed caught the last rays of sunset, its familiar pattern of squares and triangles blurring as tears filled her eyes. Kneeling beside her bed, she clasped her hands and began to pray aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dear Lord," she started, then had to pause as emotion threatened to overwhelm her. "Dear Lord, I know I ain't much. I know I don't deserve the kindness you've shown through Mr. Keene and this home. But please, please give us strength. Help us find a way to keep this place that's healed so many hurts. And if we can't..." Her voice broke. "If we can't stay, help us be brave enough to face whatever comes next. Amen." The silence that followed her prayer felt heavy with all the uncertainty of their future. Through her window, she could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called, its lonely song echoing across the pastures that might soon belong to someone else. The days after the courthouse meeting melted together like watercolors in the rain. Each sunrise brought them 24 hours closer to losing everything, and the weight of that knowledge hung over the ranch like storm clouds. Liam started in the tool shed that morning, pulling out worn leather straps and rusty implements that had helped build this place. His movements were mechanical as he placed each item into wooden crates, marking them with chalk. The screech of nails being pried from old boards filled the air as he dismantled shelving he'd built with his own hands. Abigail watched from the doorway, her heart aching at the sight of his broad shoulders bent over the task. She'd never seen him look so defeated, even as he worked with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. "I could help," she offered softly. He straightened, wiping dust from his hands onto his pants. "No need to trouble yourself with this, May." He'd taken to calling her that lately, and the nickname always warmed her heart, even in moments like this. It ain't trouble, she insisted, stepping into the musty shed. This is my home too, even if only for a little while longer. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile, and he handed her a hammer. Together they worked through the morning, sorting tools and memories into boxes. Each item had a story. The saw he'd used to build the barn door, the plane that had smoothed the kitchen table where they'd shared so many meals. When Liam stepped out to check on the cattle, Abigail slipped away down the familiar path to Ruth's cabin. The afternoon sun filtered through autumn leaves as she hurried along, her boots crunching on fallen twigs. Ruth's place sat nestled against a grove of cottonwoods, smoke curling from the stone chimney. The Cherokee woman was grinding herbs when Abigail arrived, but she set aside her work immediately, reading the desperation in the girl's face. "Come in, child," Ruth said, gesturing to a chair by the hearth. "I've been expecting you." Abigail sank into the seat, twisting her apron in her hands. "Ruth, I don't know what to do. We're losing everything, and Mr. Keene, he's trying to be strong, but I can see it's killing him inside." Ruth nodded slowly, her dark eyes thoughtful. "The land holds many memories for him, for all of us." "Please," Abigail burst out, "isn't there anything you can do? Anything you remember that might help?" Ruth was quiet for a long moment, stirring the fire with a stick. Finally she spoke. "My husband, before he walked on to the spirit world, he helped many people with their papers. He could read and write in English better than most, and folks trusted him." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "Did he ever help Mr. Keene?" "I remember the day Catherine signed the land papers," Ruth said softly. She was heavy with child, glowing like summer sunshine. My husband witnessed her mark on the deed. Abigail leaned forward eagerly. "Then there was a proper deed. Do you know where it might be?" "My husband kept copies of important papers. After he passed, I stored them all in my grandmother's chest." Ruth gestured to an ornately carved wooden box in the corner. "I will look through them carefully. There may yet be hope." Abigail wanted to hug her but held back, remembering Ruth's dignified manner. Instead, she pressed her hands together. "Thank you. Oh, thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Ruth cautioned. "First, I must find it, and you must keep this between us for now. Hope can be dangerous if it blooms too early." Abigail nodded solemnly and hurried back to the ranch, her steps lighter despite Ruth's warning. She found Liam in the corral, working with the young cattle. "Teach me to rope," she said, surprising them both. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "Rope? What brought this on?" "If I have to leave here," she said firmly, "I want to take something with me besides memories. I want to learn everything I can about ranching while there's still time." Liam studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. First thing to know is how to hold the rope proper." For the next few hours, he showed her the basics: how to coil the lariat, how to swing it in wide loops above her head, how to time the throw. Her first attempts fell short or went wild, but she refused to give up. The rope burned her palms and her shoulders ached, but she kept trying. "You're too tense," Liam advised, adjusting her grip. "Let it flow natural-like, same as singing. You don't force those hymns out, do you?" Abigail thought about that, then took a deep breath and tried again. This time the rope sailed out smoother, catching around a fence post she'd been aiming for. "There you go." Liam's approval warmed her more than the afternoon sun. "You've got the makings of a proper rancher, May." She beamed at the praise, even as her heart twisted at the thought that soon she might not have a ranch to work on. They practiced until the light began to fade, Abigail's attempts growing more accurate with each throw. As dusk painted the sky in purple and gold, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Ruth appeared on her paint pony, her face serious but her eyes bright with something that looked like triumph. "I have been searching," she announced without preamble, "and I believe there is reason for hope." Liam stepped forward, his expression guarded. "What kind of hope?" "The kind that comes with patience," Ruth replied. "I cannot say more yet, but give me time. I may have something that will help." Abigail wanted to burst out with questions, but she kept quiet, remembering her promise. Liam just nodded, years of friendship with Ruth having taught him to trust her measured ways. "Much obliged for any help you can give," he said simply. Ruth inclined her head. "I will return when I know more." She turned her pony, toward home, calling over her shoulder, "Keep practicing your roping, Abigail. A skill learned is never wasted." They watched her ride away, her silhouette merging with the gathering shadows. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the scent of autumn and change. "Reckon we should get some supper started," Liam said finally. "Been a long day." Abigail nodded, following him toward the house. Her arms were sore from roping and her hands stung from rope burns, but deep inside, a tiny flame of hope had begun to flicker. Ruth's words echoed in her mind as she helped prepare their evening meal. There might yet be a way to save their home. Later, as she lay in bed listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of the house settling, Abigail closed her eyes and prayed. Not desperate prayers like before, but quiet ones of gratitude for Ruth's wisdom and Liam's patience. Whatever happened, she knew these lessons in courage and perseverance would stay with her always. Through her window, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods. These nighttime sounds had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past months. She refused to think about them being replaced by city noises or the clash of mining machinery. Tomorrow would bring more packing, more sorting through years of accumulated life on the ranch. But it would also bring another chance to practice roping, another opportunity to learn the skills that made this land sing. And maybe, just maybe, Ruth's mysterious hope would blossom into something solid enough to save them all. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Ruth lit another oil lamp in her cabin. The flame cast dancing shadows across the walls while she knelt before her husband's old wooden chest. Outside, dark clouds churned across the late afternoon sky, promising a storm before nightfall. Abigail sat cross-legged on the plank floor beside her, watching as Ruth's weathered hands carefully lifted the chest's heavy lid. The wood creaked, releasing the scent of cedar and aged paper. "My husband kept everything in order," Ruth explained, pulling out stacks of yellowed documents. "But time has a way of mixing things up, like autumn leaves in the wind." Abigail nodded, eager to help. "Just tell me what to look for." "Any paper with Catherine's name or Liam's. The deed would have official stamps, maybe a seal." Ruth began sorting documents into neat piles. "Be gentle with them. Some are as fragile as butterfly wings now." They worked in companionable silence, broken only by the rustle of paper and distant thunder. Abigail handled each document with reverence, land treaties written in both English and Cherokee, birth records, death notices, property agreements. Her fingers trembled slightly, knowing any one of these could hold the key to saving their home. The lamp flames wavered as wind whistled through the cabin's chinks. Ruth paused to light a third lamp, pushing back the growing darkness. "The storm's coming fast," she murmured. Abigail barely heard her, focused on scanning each paper. Her heart leaped at every mention of Keene or property, only to sink again when they proved to be unrelated documents. Mining claims, cattle sales, wedding announcements. "Here's something," she said hopefully, holding up a faded receipt. But it was just a record of fence posts Liam had purchased 3 years ago. Ruth methodically worked through another stack, her dark eyes sharp despite the dim light. "My husband witnessed many important moments in people's lives," she said softly. "Births, marriages, property exchanges. He believed keeping records was a sacred trust." The wind grew stronger, rattling the cabin's shutters. Abigail's fingers moved faster through the papers, anxiety building in her chest. They had to find it. They had to. Hours passed. Ruth brought them cups of bitter coffee that grew cold as they searched. The stack of examined papers grew while the chest slowly emptied. Still no deed. Thunder cracked overhead, making Abigail jump. Rain began to patter against the roof, first in scattered drops, then in a steady drumming. She looked up to find tears blurring her vision. "It's not here," she whispered. "God's forgotten us." Ruth reached across the scattered papers to grasp Abigail's hand. "The Creator forgets no one, child. Sometimes the path is just harder to see through the storm." But Abigail could barely hear the gentle words over the roar of rain and her own disappointment. She stared at the papers surrounding them. So many hopes turned to dust. "What will we tell Mr. Keene?" "We tell him we searched with honor," Ruth said firmly. "And we keep searching. There are other places to look." Abigail gathered her shawl with trembling hands. "I should get back before dark." Ruth glanced at the window, where rain now fell in sheets. "Wait until it lets up a bit." But Abigail couldn't bear to sit still any longer. "Thank you for trying," she managed, then fled into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly as she ran along the path to home. Her boots slipped in the mud, and branches whipped at her face, but she barely noticed. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. She burst into the ranch house, dripping on the floor. Liam looked up from his Bible at the kitchen table, alarm crossing his features. "May, what in tarnation were you doing out in this?" He grabbed a blanket from his chair, wrapping it around her shoulders. "We looked through everything," she choked out. "All afternoon, but the deed wasn't there. I'm so sorry, Mr. Keene, I'm so sorry." "Hush now." He guided her to sit by the stove, where a fire crackled. "You'll catch your death." "But the ranch," she began. "Is just land and buildings," he interrupted gently. "Important, yes, but not worth you making yourself sick over." Abigail huddled in the blanket, shivering. "How can you be so calm? We're going to lose everything." Liam settled into his chair with a quiet sigh. "You know what I've learned in my years? Faith gets tested hardest right before deliverance comes. Like Job in his darkest hour. That's when God was closest, though Job couldn't see it yet." "But what if—" She stopped, unable to voice her fears. "What if God's answer is no?" Liam finished for her. "Then we trust he has a reason, and we go on. Together." Fresh tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks. "I never meant to bring such trouble to your door." "Now you listen here," Liam said firmly. "You didn't bring this trouble. Silas and his greed did that. You've brought nothing but blessing to this house." The storm raged outside, rain lashing the windows and wind howling through the eaves. Liam stoked the fire and made them both cups of hot tea. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm's fury. Later that night, in her room, Abigail knelt beside her bed. The floorboards were hard against her knees, but she barely noticed. Rain still drummed on the roof, and wind rattled the shutters, but her whispered prayers rose above the storm's voice. "Please, Lord," she pleaded, "don't let Mr. Keene lose everything because of me. He's been so good, so kind. There must be a way." She pressed her forehead against clasped hands. "I'll do anything. Work harder. Be better. Just please don't let him lose his home." Lightning flashed, illuminating her small room for a brief moment. The faded quilt on her bed, the wooden cross on the wall, the worn Bible on her nightstand, all the simple comforts of the first real home she'd known since childhood. "I know I'm not worth much," she continued softly. "I know I'm not the kind of daughter anyone would choose, but please, please help us find a way to save this place." The storm's fury seemed to match her desperate prayers, shaking the house to its foundations. But somewhere in the midst of thunder and rain, exhaustion overtook her. She fell asleep, still kneeling, her prayers unfinished on her lips. In the darkness, the storm raged on, as if heaven itself was wrestling with the weight of unanswered prayers and uncertain futures. But inside the ranch house, two souls rested in the strange peace that comes from having done all they could, leaving the rest in God's hands. Through the long night, rain fell on the tin roof, shutters rattled in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other, their haunting songs rising above the storm. The ranch house stood firm against the elements, as it had for so many years before, sheltering its inhabitants through yet another dark night, waiting for whatever morning might bring. The first pale light of dawn crept across the muddy yard as Abigail eased the door closed behind her. Her heart felt as heavy as the dew-soaked hem of her dress. The note she'd left on the kitchen table seemed to burn in her mind. "Better you lose me than the ranch." Each step away from the only real home she'd known stabbed at her chest. But she couldn't bear to be the reason Liam lost everything. The memory of Silas's sneering words about keeping strays echoed in her ears. He was right. She was just another mouth to feed, another burden. The morning air hung thick with moisture from last night's storm. Mud sucked at her boots as she trudged down the wagon trail toward town. Early birds called from the dripping trees, their cheerful songs a stark contrast to her misery. As she passed the creek where everything had begun, bitter memories flooded back. The cruel laughter of the town boys, the sting of humiliation, her clothes stolen while she hid in the reeds. She'd been nothing then, just the fat orphan girl who swept stables for scraps. And now, despite all Liam's kindness, despite learning to ride and cook and tend the ranch, she was still nothing, still a burden. Back at the ranch, Liam stirred from his fitful sleep in his chair by the stove. He'd dozed there after their late-night talk, worried about Abigail's state of mind. Something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. He found her room empty, bed barely touched. The note on the kitchen table made his blood run cold. Without stopping for his coat, he burst out to the barn, startling the horses with his urgent movements. "Easy, girl," he murmured to his mare as he saddled her with shaking hands. How could Abigail think she was worth less than property? The child had brought life back to his empty house, filled the hollow spaces with her quiet strength and occasional shy laughter. The mare's hooves threw up clods of mud as they galloped down the trail. "Please, Lord," Liam prayed through gritted teeth, "don't let me lose another daughter." Minutes after Liam's departure, Ruth's horse appeared through the morning mist. She dismounted quickly, clutching a yellowed document to her chest. Her dark eyes took in the open barn door, the fresh hoofprints leading away. "No, no," she muttered, hurrying to the house. Finding it empty, she unfolded the precious paper in her hands, the deed she'd discovered just moments ago, hidden beneath a stack of old ledgers. Her husband's neat signature marked the bottom as witness to Liam's wife's ownership. Without hesitation, Ruth ran back to her horse. The saddlebag thumped against the animal's flanks as they set off after Liam's tracks, the precious document secured inside. The morning sun broke through the clouds as she urged her mount faster, praying they weren't too late. Ahead on the trail, Abigail stumbled on, her legs aching. The town's church steeple had just become visible through the trees when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She knew without turning that it would be Liam. Part of her wanted to run and hide, like that day at the creek. But she was tired of running. She stood still in the middle of the muddy road, head bowed, as Liam's horse splashed to a stop beside her. Her dress was soaked to the knees, her shoes caked with mud. She couldn't bear to look up at him. "May," Liam's voice cracked with emotion. "Child, what are you doing?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Saving your ranch," she whispered. "Silas is right. I'm just a burden. If I go, maybe he'll be satisfied with just the land." "Look at me," Liam commanded gently. When she finally raised her eyes, his face was fierce with love and determination. "You are not a burden. You're my daughter in every way that matters. The ranch means nothing without family to share it." More hoofbeats approached, Ruth appearing through the morning mist like an answer to prayer. Her face glowed with triumph as she pulled the deed from her saddlebag. "The land is yours, Liam," she called out, waving the document. "My husband witnessed your wife's signature. The ranch belongs to you alone. Silas has no claim." Abigail stared at the paper in Ruth's hands, hardly daring to believe. All this time, the answer had been waiting, buried under years of paperwork. She swayed slightly, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion. Liam swung down from his horse, gathering Abigail into a fierce embrace. "You see," he murmured into her hair, "God's timing is perfect, even when we can't understand it. Now come home, daughter, come home." The creek gurgled softly, its waters running clear after the storm. Here, where shame had first cut deepest, Abigail's legs gave out. She crumpled to her knees in the wet grass, deep sobs racking her body. The morning dew soaked through her skirts, but she barely noticed. Liam dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots squelching in the mud. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his worn leather coat, the same one he'd wrapped around her that first day, and draped it over her trembling shoulders. The familiar smell of leather and tobacco enveloped her like an embrace. "Listen to me, child," Liam said, his voice rough with emotion. He knelt beside her, heedless of the mud staining his trousers. "That land, those buildings, they're just wood and dirt. But you?" He gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You're the daughter God sent to heal my broken heart. I'd rather lose every acre than lose you." Abigail's tears fell faster. "But your wife's memory, the home you built together. Sarah would have loved you," Liam said softly, his eyes distant with remembrance. "She always said God makes no mistakes in souls. Only humans make mistakes in seeing them." He squeezed Abigail's shoulder. "The day I found you here, that was no mistake. That was providence." Something broke loose in Abigail's chest, a knot of unworthiness she'd carried since childhood. She fell forward against Liam's chest, her tears soaking his shirt front. His arms came around her, strong and sure, holding her like she was precious. For the first time, she believed it completely, believed she belonged, believed she was wanted, believed she was loved. Hoofbeats approached rapidly, splashing through puddles. Ruth reined her horse to a stop, breathing hard, from her gallop. Her long black hair had come loose from its braid, whipping in the morning breeze. Triumph blazed in her dark eyes as she swung down from the saddle. "The answer was there all along," Ruth said, pulling the yellowed document from her saddlebag. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. "My husband witnessed your Sarah's signature the day she registered her half-ownership. The land is yours alone, Liam, by law and by right." Liam stood slowly, helping Abigail to her feet. He took the deed with reverent hands, reading the faded ink. His wife's flowing signature seemed to shimmer through the years, a final gift of protection reaching across time. "Providence indeed," he whispered. Then his jaw set with determination. "It's time to end this. Time to face Silas with truth." He turned to Abigail, who stood straighter now despite her tear-stained face. "Ready to ride home, daughter?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the word. "Yes, father." Liam lifted her onto his horse with gentle hands, just as he had that first day. But this time, instead of a terrified girl clutching his vest, she sat tall in the saddle. He swung up behind her, gathering the reins. Ruth mounted her own horse, the precious deed now secure in her saddlebag. "I'll ride with you," she said firmly. "My husband's witness mark helps prove the truth. It's fitting I should see this through." Together they turned their horses toward town. The morning sun broke fully through the clouds now, painting the wet grass with gold. Abigail felt the warmth on her face, felt Liam's steady presence behind her, felt Ruth's quiet strength riding beside them. The creek's gentle sound faded behind them as they rode. This place that had once held only shame now marked a different memory. The moment Abigail May finally believed, bone deep and certain, that she was home. Inside the courthouse, dust motes danced in shafts of morning light. Silas Avery stood at the clerk's desk, quill poised over the claim papers, a triumphant smile playing across his face. His fine coat seemed to gleam with satisfaction as he prepared to sign away Liam's home. The double doors creaked open. Liam entered first, his boots leaving muddy prints on the wooden floor. Abigail followed close behind, her chin held high despite her damp dress. Ruth Two Feathers stepped in last, her dark eyes fierce with purpose. "Just in time to witness the transfer," Silas drawled, not looking up from the papers. Ruth strode forward, pulling the weathered deed from her saddlebag. "There will be no transfer today," she said, laying the document before the clerk. "This deed bears Sarah Keene's signature, witnessed by my late husband." The clerk adjusted his spectacles, examining the yellowed parchment with careful fingers. His eyes widened as he traced the flowing signature, comparing dates and seals. After several tense moments, he looked up. "This deed is genuine," he declared. "Sarah Keene registered her. Half ownership of the ranch. Upon her death, full rights passed to her husband. The property belongs solely to Liam Keene." Color drained from Silas's face. "Impossible! This is fraud!" He snatched at the deed, but Deputy Marshal Carter stepped forward, one hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "I suggest you leave town peaceably, Mr. Avery," the marshal said quietly. "Your claim has no standing here." Silas's face contorted with fury. "This isn't over," he spat, storming towards the door. "I'll be back with lawyers from Denver." The door slammed behind him, but his threats rang hollow now. Liam's hand found Abigail's shoulder, squeezing gently. Pride shone in his eyes as he looked down at her. Around them, townspeople whispered, but the tone had changed. Where once there had been mockery, now Abigail heard something new: respect. The change in town sentiment rippled outward like waves in a pond. Church ladies who had once whispered cruel gossip now appeared at the ranch gate bearing fresh-baked bread and apple pies. Mrs. Peterson brought a berry cobbler, her eyes downcast as she apologized for past unkindness. "We were wrong about you, dear," she admitted, pressing Abigail's hand. "God's love shines through your voice and your heart." Miss Walker, the schoolmarm, caught Abigail after Sunday service. "Would you consider teaching hymns to the children?" she asked. "They've been asking to learn since hearing you sing." Abigail's cheeks flushed with pleasure. "I reckon I could try," she answered softly. Liam marked her growing confidence with pride. One afternoon, He returned from town with a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a fine riding skirt of sturdy wool, complete with split panels for proper mounting. "A lady who works cattle needs proper gear," he said, eyes twinkling. "You belong in the saddle as much as any rancher." Ruth Two Feathers moved her herb garden closer to their property line, building a friendship steady as the seasons. She taught Abigail Cherokee words for healing plants and shared stories of her people's wisdom. One evening at supper, lamplight pooling golden on the worn table, Abigail opened the family Bible. Her voice grew stronger as she read the story of Ruth and Naomi, two women bound not by blood but by faithful love. "Entreat me not to leave thee," she read clearly, "for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." Liam set down his coffee cup, eyes glistening in the lamp's glow. "That's mighty fitting," he said softly, "for you're as dear to me as any daughter could be." Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks, but her smile shone brighter than the lamp's flame. In that moment, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she had finally, truly come home. Weeks passed like water flowing in the creek, steady and sure. The rhythm of ranch life settled deep into Abigail's bones, as natural as breathing. Each morning brought familiar chores that no longer felt like burdens. They were the heartbeat of home. The first snow arrived on a hushed November morning. Abigail woke to find the world transformed, draped in white that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Frost patterns decorated the window panes, delicate as lacework. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, marveling at how different everything looked from when she'd first arrived in summer's heat. "Reckon we ought to ride into town for supplies before more snow comes," Liam said over breakfast, sliding a plate of flapjacks across the worn table. "Would you care to join me, daughter?" The word still warmed her heart every time he said it. Abigail nodded, already anticipating the ride. She'd grown comfortable in the saddle these past months, learning to move as one with her horse across the rolling prairie. They set out mid-morning, after the sun had softened the frost. Abigail sat tall astride her mare, no longer the frightened girl who'd once hidden in creek reeds. Her new wool riding skirt kept her warm, and her confidence ran deeper than any clothing could show. As they approached town, she spotted a cluster of boys near the general store, the same ones who had stolen her clothes that shameful day. But now, when they caught sight of her, their eyes dropped to the ground. They shuffled their boots in the snow, unable to meet her steady gaze. Their silence spoke volumes about how much had changed. Liam noticed, too. He reached across to squeeze her hand. "You've come a long way," he said softly. The church bell rang out across the snowy street, calling people to Sunday service. Inside, warmth from the pot-bellied stove wrapped around them like a blanket. Abigail took her usual place in the choir section, no longer questioning if she belonged. When the first hymn began, she lifted her voice clear and strong. The congregation followed her lead as she sang Amazing Grace, her rich tones guiding them through each verse. Even the pastor closed his eyes in appreciation as the harmony filled every corner of the small church. Mrs. Peterson wiped tears from her eyes afterward. "The Lord surely blessed you with a gift," she whispered, patting Abigail's arm. "Such a voice of praise." The ride home was peaceful, their horses' hooves making soft prints in the fresh snow. Ruth met them at the ranch gate, her dark hair dusted with white flakes. She carried a pot of stew and her special herb tea, perfect for a cold winter's evening. As darkness fell, they gathered in the main room. The fireplace crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Liam stoked the flames while Ruth poured tea into 3 tin cups. They settled into their chairs, forming a circle of contentment. Liam reached for their hands, creating an unbroken chain of touch. His weathered fingers were warm against Abigail's palm. Ruth's grip was gentle but sure on her other side. "Lord," Liam began, his voice thick with emotion, "we thank you for your mighty works. You took our shame and turned it into family. You filled our loneliness with belonging." He paused, squeezing Abigail's hand. "You brought us together, 3 souls who needed each other, and made us whole." "Amen," Ruth murmured, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Through the window, stars blazed in the crystal-clear sky, countless points of light scattered across the vast prairie night. Abigail gazed at them, remembering nights when she'd slept on stable floors, wondering if she'd ever find her place in the world. "Home," she whispered, the word carrying all the peace her heart held. It wasn't just the ranch house, though its solid walls sheltered her. Home was Liam's steady strength and fatherly love. Home was Ruth's quiet wisdom and healing touch. Home was the land itself, stretching wide under the winter stars. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Ruth poured more tea, the herbal scent mixing with wood smoke. Liam hummed a hymn tune under his breath. These simple moments, Abigail realized, were God's greatest gifts, the quiet joy of belonging, the steady warmth of family chosen by love, rather than blood. She looked at her reflection in the window glass. The frightened, shame-filled girl from the creek had transformed, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. In her place sat a young woman with clear eyes and quiet dignity, surrounded by love that had been earned through trust and time. Outside, a lone coyote called across the snowy prairie. Another answered in the distance, their wild song floating under the stars. But Abigail felt no fear, no loneliness. Here, between Liam's strength and Ruth's grace, she had found her true place. Here, finally, she was home. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.